So, yes, welcome everyone. I am very proud to present our speakers today who will introduce themselves in a second. And this is also the last session of our this year's Ada Lovelace Day. So we're very happy for everyone who joined during the past 2 days. So our speakers, let me just name them very briefly because I don't want to take any of their introduction away. So we have Sneha joining us. Sneha is a security research analyst at Cisco. Lucy Havens used to work as a web developer and designer and consultant, but is currently doing a PhD in design informatics at the moment. I think it's design informatics, but definitely does university. Then we have Elitsa. Elitsa is a software engineer at Google. And Professor Alex Lascarides, who's professor in semantics as well. And we have Aditi joining us as well, whom most of you might know from yesterday's workshop, and Aditi is an experienced designer. We actually had a sixth person on the panel as well, but Olivia is sending her regrets. She had a very urgent thing for one of her projects pop up, so she cannot join us today. But I think we have a really cool group today, and what we're going to do is everyone will get like 5 minutes to present themselves, so you get a bit of an idea of who they are and what kind of questions you can ask and what you're interested about. So they will also talk a bit about their jobs, and then we're going to dive into questions. So I'm very excited, quite excited to get to know you a bit better as well. So yes, anyone want to start with their self-presentation, self-introduction? Or shall I pick names?
I can start. Sure. Whatever.
Aditi, do you want to start?
Sure,
You're the first on my list.
Or
I can't actually hear you, unfortunately. Can everyone else hear you?
I can hear her.
Can you
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear her. Yeah. Alex, did you say you wanted to go first?
I will quickly just leave the chat and come back in because I think this worked in between.
Alphabetical order.
Sure, yeah. We can do alphabetical.
Yes, I will be back in like 1 second.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, Nicole.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely do alphabetical order. Let me start off then. Starting just by sharing my screen. Okay, so can all of you see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to start off, and hopefully I won't eat up too much of everyone else's time. Hopefully none of anyone else's time. But hi everyone, it's really nice to meet all of you. And I'm so excited for this opportunity to meet a bunch of people who are all working in similar fields and doing exciting things. So thank you for the chance. And a bit about me, I work as an experience designer. Because I work as part of a small team, I also get to contribute in a couple of other avenues. So that's I get to dabble in some of the business side of things and whatnot. So it's really I find that really exciting. And to kind of give you the overview, I work on building experiences for new products or new services. And while I focus mostly on the design parts of it and I contribute to some of the business, I also have an awareness of how the products and services and experiences are engineered, so that feeds into my design. And I can hopefully propose realistic designs rather than completely unrealistic ones. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I won't go super deep into, let's say, the process that I use. On a high level, I try and understand the users that I'm designing for, and then come up with products or services or experiences which work well for those users. And here are some examples of things that I've designed in the recent past and what's become a big focus of my work in this current team. So if you see these digital displays which sit at the edge of the shelf, they're kind of like a thin, long TV which sits at the edge of the shelf. And we started out, my team started out with this being completely blank. And they said, hey, Aditi, can you design what goes up here? And so that was kind of my first project, and that was what I did. And I, of course, had a lot of help from different team members who are experts in world of retail, because as you see, this is inside a retail store, and that's where I work. Um, and I had to, I kind of dove into the deep end. I got to decide a bunch of things like what information is useful to show to users. And as you can see, at that point, I thought it was helpful to show people who are shopping for coffee machines about the ratings and reviews and stuff like that. Also, which products are selling and very popular and stuff like that. I also got to do a lot of the decision making about what colors we use. I got to make some of the iconography, as you see here. So I really, this was a very hands-on project for me. Um, and it was a pretty new field for Walmart to explore. Though I don't know, like we've been trying to do electronic shelf labels for a while, so maybe it's not that new after all. So I don't know, there's perspectives. But then I went on to try on, the same process in a couple of other categories. Um, in so that was the mattress category that you see here, and again we have prices, and I got to decide what kind of information is helpful to show. I've also done it in the false nails and the false eyelashes category. But I do want to talk really quickly about what my journey has been like, because it's a little non-traditional. So I know that starting from electrical and electronics engineering and going to design innovation is not a very common experience. I just want to quickly talk about um, how I made that transition. So and I'm hoping that it'll help some of you if you're trying to transition to also think through going through some of these steps. So sort of what my journey has been like is, initially when I was in about the final year or the third of my undergrad, I realized I wanted to do something different. But these were the big questions. What is it that I want to do, and how do I figure that out? And so my solution was to try loads of different things, which kind of involved doing a certain mechanical engineering course and painting in my free time and going to a lot of these clubs and stuff at college, student clubs, and I did a couple of internships as well. I figured out lots of things I like to do and things I didn't like to do, and I think trial was really important. I then started kind of narrowing down on them, and I saw a bunch of other people who have pursued similar career paths. And then so a lot of it was just messaging people on Facebook. And then I took a few steps in the new directions, and I applied to courses and stuff like that. I built up my material and got into the course that I finally did my master's in, and I completed a few projects. I searched for a bunch of jobs, applied to lots of jobs, and that's sort of where I've ended up, and that's how I've made this transition. But I really don't know what's next. Let's see what's next. I work as an experience designer right now, but it feels like I'm just at the beginning of a much bigger journey, and I don't really know where I'm going to end up, but I'm excited to go on that journey. And so I'm gonna stop now and say that that's a bit about me, and hand back over so that we can hear about some of the other presenters.
Thank you very much, Aditi. That was a great insight into your projects.
Absolutely.
So let's invite Alex to speak as well. I'll just go through the list, and then after that we'll ask questions. So if you have questions, please do write them down, and we're gonna ask questions afterwards.
Okay, so hi everyone. Unlike Aditi, I didn't prepare any slides, so I'm just going to talk for 5 minutes. And actually, I think what I'm going to do is give you a chronological order to how I got to where I am today. And at that point, I will talk about the current job. So my undergraduate degree, I went to Durham intending to do maths, and I love maths. And actually, I really think I'm one of those people that ends up doing what I did because of an influential school teacher. I remember her name, it was Mrs. Shamasco. And the bizarre thing about lockdown, actually, is that I've started doing Keep Fit on Zoom, online, and by sheer coincidence, Mrs. Shamasco, who's like long dead, she would be over 100 now, her daughter's doing the same Keep Fit class. Anyway, it's like amazing. I could tell her, you changed my life. Your mum changed my life. Anyway, maths. Okay, back to Durham. I did maths, and you had to take an outside course. I started off doing theoretical physics as my outside course because I felt my applied maths wasn't brilliant. And I thought, after one lecture, I thought, this is not for me, it's vile. So I decided to do an elective in philosophy instead, and loved it, absolutely loved it. And I loved being stretched into thinking about problems that, you know, really get discussed in the humanities, in the science and rigor of maths. And I wanted to carry on being stretched that way. Well, Durham doesn't offer a joint degree in maths and philosophy. And from the second and third years, you have to take just maths. So I said, well, that's me. I'm out of here. I'm going to go to Oxford where you can do the joint degree. So I had to fight for it. But in the end, Durham let me have this sort of special concession to carry on doing both subjects. So although my degree is in maths, I did lots of philosophy as well and carried on a sort of being stretched across the disciplinary boundaries. So then I went for a careers talk in my third year at Durham with a careers officer there. And I said, I like being stretched across the science humanities boundaries. What should I do? And he suggested three things: ergonomics and design. So that's a bit, you know, it's a bit not like what Aditi's doing, but not a million miles away. What was the other? Oh yeah, code breaking, GCHQ. Or artificial intelligence. Now, we're talking early 80s, right? So my answer to that was a question: artificial intelligence, what's that? Well, he said, go find out in the careers library. So I went off to find out, and I thought, oh yeah, this sounds good. So I applied to Edinburgh to do artificial intelligence, turn up for the interview and start talking about how we've been reading Wittgenstein's Tractatus, and they think, you're mad. So they sent me off to the epistemics department, as was, which took me in, and I did my PhD there. Loved it. Very collegiate atmosphere. I just loved the place, loved the city, and loved the subject. And so straight after, in my final year of PhD, I applied for postdoc fellowships, got those. And also, while doing the fellowship, I thought I really need to network. So I started a European summer school in logic, language, and information, which 30 years later actually is still going. It sort of goes around different cities in Europe each year. But that first summer school was incredibly successful. I think there was a gap in the market I only realized was there when I started organizing it. But it got my name known and in a way opened doors. Nevertheless, because I was really fussy about living in Edinburgh, Edinburgh was just in my heart. I spent 10 years on wildly insecure money, sort of applying as a PI for research grants that could then employ me as an RA. Actually, something you can't even do now. You have to find a member of academic staff to be a PI these days. And I think that's kind of a horrible part of the academic structure, the way it is now, that I didn't have to fight against, 30 years ago. And I thought, no, sod this, I can't stand the insecurity, and went to Stanford on an assistant professorship. And loved Stanford, actually, but I was on a first date with a guy. Went to see 4 Weddings and a Funeral, so that really ages me, right? This is back in 1994. And I guess because it's a British film, this Visiting Scotland ad came up in the advert, and I started weeping because I missed Edinburgh so much. So I quit Stanford and came back to Edinburgh, spent another 3 years on insecure money, and finally got a lectureship. then promoted to reader, and then promoted to professor. So my job now is actually one in which I am saturated with stuff to do. So there are three strands to my job. There's administration and management, teaching, and research. On administration and management, I'm director of a research institute, which means that I'm line managing about 50 people. And I also have to sort of think very strategically about the research vision and the research direction of that group of people, and recognize where the field as a whole, which is largely cognitive science and natural language processing, where it's going and where it's going to land, and find those sources of funding for everybody, and encourage them to apply. So it's a difficult management job because you're herding cats, right? I mean, they're academics at the end of the day who are academics precisely because they love their freedom. So telling them to do anything is like a nightmare. But so you have to sort of manage by consensus. I'm still learning how to do that, because actually being the director of this institute is a new job for me. I've only been in it for about 3 months. So that's my management job. Teaching, I teach 2 courses, both are quite large, the equivalent of AI 101 and Natural Language Processing 101. Both hot topics, so both very popular, but I love teaching, and I especially love teaching things I don't know, because then I learn them. And through doing that, I've actually forged entirely new research agendas. And then my research has changed a lot over the years. So I started out really in logic and philosophy of language, and it really was a combination of the pure maths and philosophy that I did. But now I work with robots, and it's much more AI based. So the research has evolved over the decades. Now, none of this was, I can't say any of my career choices were strategic. I think a lot of it is bumbling into stuff, and I don't recommend that, actually. It's a stupid thing to do, but that's what I did. Right, that's my 5 minutes. Probably longer, sorry.
That's all good. Thank you very much, Alex.
Okay.
That's very interesting. Amazing. So after we had Alex speak, is Elitsa start?
Yeah, so it's me. Yeah, let me just quickly share my slides. I have just a couple of them. So, hopefully you could still see them. Yeah, so my name is Elitsa, and I actually studied in Edinburgh, and I graduated 2 years ago. I did a bachelor degree in AI and computer science, which means that I actually took a course by Alex a couple of years ago. I started my journey by applying for a Google internship because of a Hoppers event about 6 years ago. So after that, I actually got 3 internships in Google. 2 were in Switzerland, 1 was in California. And then I joined after my thesis as a software engineer in the Swiss office, and I've been here ever since, and I'm working on the knowledge graph. Now, what is the knowledge graph? Knowledge graph is Google's representation of the real world. It just contains many, many things, which we call entities. There are about, or even more than 570 million entities in our graph, and it contains more than 18 billion facts. So I think it's easier to explain what the knowledge graph is with an example. So here we have the entity University of Edinburgh, and we know that it is founded in 1582. We also know that the School of Informatics is part of the University of Edinburgh. We also know that the School of Informatics is founded in 1998. We know that the University of Edinburgh is in the city of Edinburgh, and this is in Scotland. It's kind of like a tiny subset of what the graph actually is. And what do we actually use the knowledge graph for? It's to enhance search and assistant queries. So here's an example of when is School of Informatics Edinburgh founded. And then instead of the user clicking through a couple of links to find the year of foundation, Google just gives you the result immediately. And this is done through the knowledge graph because we annotate the given text. So School of Informatics in this case is annotated with the entity School of Informatics, and then we could search when exactly is the year of foundation. And what I actually do is improve the annotation quality of those searches. And yeah, that's more or less my job. And I'm gonna stop presenting now. Yeah.
Very much, Elitsa. That was a good insight. Also, for those who don't know what a knowledge graph is, also learned a bit about that. Thank you very much. So the next person on my list is Lucy Havens. Lucy, do you want to? Yeah, cool. You didn't show up in my as a video, so thanks. I'll leave the stage for you.
All right, well, thank you for having me. So as Nicole mentioned, I'm Lucy. I'm currently a PhD student, but I've had a couple of jobs outside of academia, so I'll be talking about those two today. And I'm actually going to go in reverse chronological order. So most recently, I was working as a senior web developer at the Royal Bank of Scotland. And then before that, I worked as a consultant in customer experience for a firm called West Monroe Partners. And that was in between my undergrad and my master's work. So at Royal Bank of Scotland, or RBS, I had the opportunity to work on a team that had a rather unusual mix of skills for the bank. So we had both developers and designers in a team of only about 8 people. And I positioned myself as both a developer and designer, although my title didn't necessarily say it. And so my activities in my job included everything from user research and user interface design to actual development work, which was mostly done in React. My typical day at RBS would start around 8:30 or 9. I'd check my email and try to read up on news in RBS and the banking sector because, especially coming from outside the UK, I felt like I had a lot to learn about banking in the UK. And then my team worked in Agile, so we would always start the morning off with a 15-minute team call, just kind of checking in on where everybody was at. And then for the rest of the day, I was mostly on my own unless I had meetings in the afternoon. So if I was focused on more design work, I'd be potentially preparing for user interviews or meetings with team members in the afternoon to kind of review what we were doing so far in our user interface design work. And if I was focused on development work, then I would pull up any tutorials I might be referencing. I'd open up the most recent version of the data portal that I helped work on while I was there, and then I would start coding. And what was great about RBS was they positioned their team all in similar places, and everybody was really willing to help and answer questions. So if I ever got stuck, I could just ping somebody on Skype or walk over to their desk and ask them a question, or they could come over to my desk. Then the other job I'll talk about is when I was consulting at West Monroe Partners, which I found to be very different from my job at RBS. West Monroe Partners is a business and technology consulting firm that works in a variety of industries and is mostly based in the US, but not exclusively. Its client projects range from more kind of strategic work, doing things like helping a business shift its strategy to be more customer-centric, all the way to kind of recommendations and implementations of technologies. So for example, our company started to focus quite a bit on implementing Salesforce, which is a customer relationship management system. I came to West Monroe right out of undergrad, so I began at the entry-level position of consultant, and then kind of followed a path after a year, became an experienced consultant. And those titles are pretty important because they'll indicate to a project manager how much experience you have and how much responsibility they can trust you with, because due to West Monroe's size, the projects often weren't multi-year, so you would usually have multiple project managers within a single year. And so that title would kind of give them a good sense of how many hours they should expect you to be able to dedicate to different tasks. During client projects, typically, I think this is common at a lot of consulting firms. I have a couple of friends who work at other places as well, but at West Monroe worked out that Mondays through Thursdays we'd work at our client office, usually leaving a bit early in the afternoon on Thursday and then just kind of working from the plane or the train. And then on Friday we'd be in our home office. And I actually really enjoyed Fridays when I first worked there because they tended to be kind of filled with meetings and helped me really get familiar with the company I joined. My home office was in New York City, and that was one of the West Monroe Partners' smallest offices, which I felt like gave me kind of more insight and more opportunities to participate in more diverse aspects of the business than some of my peers who had worked at the larger offices. And every day was totally different, which I absolutely loved. So I'll end there and just say, like, I think if you're looking for a first job, consulting is great, but it is very fast paced and can be exhausting because of that. So the environment at RBS was sort of a lot calmer and definitely at times healthier for my mental well-being. But anyway, thank you for your interest in my job experience, and hopefully I can answer questions about either job if it's of interest.
Thank you very much, Lucy. It's great to hear a bit more insights. Okay, so last but not least, I have Sneha. Please,
Yeah.
you can take over.
Hey everyone. Thanks, Nicole. Hi everybody. I'm Sneha Shekar. I work as a security research analyst at Cisco. I am a GREM certified malware analyst and a Cisco Security Ninja black belt holder. I completed my undergrad in information science and engineering in 2019. As part of my coursework during my 8th semester, I interned at Cisco as a software developer. During my internship, I started getting very restless and started looking at other domains in tech that I could explore. Cybersecurity, which is relatively very new compared to software development, caught my interest. The more I read up on the field and the more research I did, I was convinced that this is something that I wanted to pursue. So after my internship, I joined Cisco as a security research analyst. Now coming to a bit about what I do, all of us today use the internet for just about everything. We browse hundreds of different websites on a daily basis. My job as a security researcher is to ensure that these websites that you browse are safe and the user is not at risk of falling prey to a cyber attack if they visit a particular site. I also actively work on reverse engineering various different malware and ransomware samples. I try to figure out how these operate and block any malicious indicators that I may find for Cisco's customers. Apart from this, I also build a lot of prototypes to aid in various threat hunting and malware reversing processes. Being a part of this domain, I also consider it my social responsibility to educate others about this field. And in that endeavor, I conduct workshops and give talks at various forums and universities across India. I also write technical articles and blogs to just about any interesting malware that I may have found, or any interesting cyber trend that I'm seeing, just to spread awareness and hopefully to reach a wider audience. That's pretty much what I do. Before I pass it over to you, Nicole, I'd like to thank you for having me here and thank Hoppers for having me here. It's a great opportunity to be able to share the stage with so many distinguished people in their own field, and I'm hoping we have a very interactive and informative session ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you for your kind words. I'm very keen, to just hear about everything and all your different jobs. And I also hope we have like a very informative session here. So yes, and thank you for introduction, everyone. So we do have now about an hour to kind of ask questions. So if you want to ask a question to the group, please raise your hand and mute yourself, or post a question into the chat. And while you think of questions, I I will start off with a bit of a general question for everyone. We also said that we will just try to everyone will just try to speak. We will try to avoid the raise hand feature for the panel members. If it doesn't work, we'll just try to see how we'll solve this, either with raising hands or a visual hand raise. So what is it that you enjoy most about your job? So we already heard a bit about that, but I would be interested to hear what is it that you actually really love very much. Okay, Alex, start. Yeah.
It's my colleagues and students. I mean, I just love interaction. So I've found actually COVID, I've really struggled with it, because you don't have those amazing spontaneous intellectual conversations that you just happen to have because you bump into people in the corridor. And that's what I miss. that's what I love the most, and that's what I now miss. Because now meetings are scheduled and planned, but it's the unplanned stuff that I love. And it gives a sense of belonging and community, because we all sort of share a goal, and we're all heading towards that goal, even though we work largely independently. But I love that part of the job.
Maybe I'll go as well and talk about what I love about the job. I think for me, similarly, I really like, knowing about people, and I enjoy being in a job where that's a fundamental part of my job. When you have to design an experience, you have to understand who you're designing for and why they want it. So I really enjoy that it's a very important part of my job. I also enjoy being in a team in which I can explore lots of different technologies, and it feels like I'm going in. This is my little playground where I can play with things. So I really enjoy that aspect of exploration and how we can just work with lots of new stuff. So yeah.
That sounds very
I
interesting. Yeah, Sneha,
I
go ahead.
think I was just looking at the chat, and Aparna has asked me a question directly. So should I just take that?
Sure. I thought maybe everyone can just say something about what they enjoy most
Oh,
about the
all
job.
right. Okay.
But
I think,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, I could do that too. I think I really like the fact that, every day in my job, I see something new. Every day is a learning. So since cyber attacks and cyber trends are constantly evolving, it's like you have to be at the top of your game every single day, because you may think that this is the kind of attack that's going to happen, but the attacker's always 3 steps ahead, and we're just trying to play catch up. So every day is a learning, and I find that very challenging and interesting.
Amazing. I love challenge and trying things out and talking to people as well. It doesn't seem to be very specific actually to a job. Lucy, do you want to share as well?
Yeah, so I'd say I think with my consulting job when I was at West Monroe, the thing that I liked the most, I think, was the thing that also surprised me the most, because when I was in school, in my undergrad, I should say, I really didn't like group projects because I felt like there was always that one person that didn't want to do the work or didn't show up to meetings. But when I was working, I found all of a sudden everybody was equally committed and super knowledgeable. And so I felt like I was learning a lot, always being in this team environment. And then I think in terms of my job at RBS, I think one of the things I really liked and perhaps valued more because I'd been consulting before was the team of people that I got to be a part of, because I actually was able to work with the same group for quite a long period of time, and they'd been at the bank kind of anywhere from like 2 to 10 years. So it was helpful in just sort of getting familiar with the way the bank worked, but then also just being able to kind of bounce ideas off of them. I felt like I felt like they were very open to questions, and they weren't intimidating, which I really appreciated because the bank as a whole is huge. So to me, it was rather intimidating.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah.
And I guess I'm last. I could definitely second the people part. At Google, the culture is like, it's amazing. Like you have really great, smart people that you just can approach. It's like very easy to just schedule one-on-one with literally everyone, and everyone is like really, really approachable. And I really understand the whole concept of people makes a great team, because if you have a great team you work with and everyone is like super approachable and you really like your manager, you could really navigate the project the way you want. Like you could really work on something that excites you. Even if there's at some point you get like a project that is not so interesting, you always navigate, and like people are understanding and will let you work on something that actually truly interests you. So definitely culture and people is like one of the most important parts. And also I guess the scale of things, like and we work at Search, and like we get to deal with like all the internet, right? Like it's just a very big scale we work on things. And I also really like the style code is so nice here. Actually, like, there is style guide and people actually follow it and everything. It's like a lot better than other places I've worked in. And yeah.
That sounds really cool. I feel like people are very important. That's something that I enjoy as well. Like, also struggled a bit during COVID because all meetings are virtual and scheduled, and you kind of, yeah, as Alex also said, you kind of miss that spontaneous interaction, or like, oh, let's grab a coffee, and then you just do that because this is kind of not possible. But I actually think it's great because we can actually reach way more people now. So, well, we have people in so many different locations. Just in the panel today, I'm currently in Berlin, and I can talk to people who are in Zurich or, you know, in India, and otherwise that would not be like as easy probably. So yes, I will actually start with the questions from the audience now. So we have a question to Sneha, whether you face a lot of cyber attacks as part of your job.
So actually, my job kind of involves trying to prevent an attack before it happens. So we are actively scouting the internet and we keep trying to keep ourselves updated with the latest attack that's going around. So before any of Cisco's customers are impacted by that attack, we try to block it. For example, the Maze ransomware that was going around in the beginning of this year, luckily no one at Cisco was affected, because before it could affect any of us, we went around, reverse engineer the sample and try to block the indicators of compromise. But yeah, we come across very interesting attacks in the process, but we haven't really been in the middle of an attack. I haven't yet.
It also seems like there are, well, I actually don't know too much about what your job involves, but you gave a great insight into it. But it seems also that a lot of jobs have like stereotypes associated with it, like a cybersecurity analyst, kind of security analyst, kind of deals with cyber attacks, which is a part of what you do. So it's maybe just a question to the group as well, like what kind of stereotypes are there about your job, and how accurate are those as well, to kind of tie in into a previous question there.
The first thing anyone asks me when I say I'm in cybersecurity, oh, can you hack into somebody's account for me? That's the first question I get, and I cannot, but I know people in cybersecurity who can. So I think that's like a stereotype because they're just so used to seeing hackers in movies, and they say, oh, she's in cybersecurity, she can get through any security, any password, she can crack it for us. But no, I can't. That's one thing I've come across a lot, actually.
The stereotype in my case, I'm going to talk about the stereotype that people have if they've only got a bachelor's degree or not even that. The stereotype for academics is that they have long holidays, like school teachers. They live in a kind of ivory tower. Real life problems don't concern them and don't they don't think about them, and they do some kind of weird stuff and teach our kids. It couldn't be further from the truth, to be honest. We have big, fat, and complicated links with industry. We are very concerned with real life problems, and maybe that part of the stereotype of an academic will be dispelled actually by COVID, because it's clear what scientists do and how quickly they respond to world needs, as has been shown over the last 6 months. And long holidays, oh my God, no. I can't remember the last time I took my full holiday entitlement, maybe 35 years ago. I mean, I work 70 hours a week. It's not, it's normal. I actually have to really watch that I don't burn out. So it's not a doddle in the way that people think.
That's no joke, Alex. That's really intense. It sounds like, there's a lot of different facets of being an academic that, of course, a lot of us don't know about. For my job, I think as a designer, one of the things that intimidates, I feel, people who don't come from a design background, is that it seems like there's no process. It's just creativity that and designers just come up with things somehow. But actually, I don't think that's the case. There's actually a lot of different processes, a lot of different methods that are studied and reviewed and developed in terms of if you want to build a design, there's a particular path which you can follow, and you can be fairly certain that you'll come up with at least a decent design, right? So I think for me, coming from an engineering background, that was a stereotype I had as well. And then luckily I was able to break it as I got deeper and deeper into it, is that there's a lot of structured methods, repeatable methods. There's a science to the art. So yeah, I think that's a big one for me.
And Lucy, you are kind of in designer as well, right? So, do you experience similar stereotypes, or do you experience something different?
I don't know. I think I've always sort of tried to put myself like in between two different things, and so I think it's sort of constantly like reminding people that I don't really fit in either stereotype, whether it's like partially true or just not true at all. I do think though, one thing that came to mind more was just working at a bank. I had some people who like a bank, like I've talked about wanting to work in libraries and museums for a really long time, so people that knew me were surprised. But I think if you go in with a bit of a technical background to pretty much any business, there's an opportunity to be involved in a bit more of the sort of like innovative and experimental work. And so I, for example, was at a bank where they were developing like this new internal data portal, and nothing like that had existed before. And so it was a lot more, I was seeing a lot more, I think, like adaptability and kind of willingness to experiment than I had previously associated with banks as kind of organizations.
Okay, thank you very much. So Ellie, you also you work for Google, so this is kind of has a lot of stereotypes associated. There's a lot of, I know, this is like the dream company, or one of the dream companies for undergraduates to go and work for, right? It's one of the top companies. So are there any kind of stereotypes that you encounter based on your job or your employer as well?
I mean, quite a lot of my friends think that I have knowledge about anything tech related, which is definitely not the truth. Like I might be very knowledgeable about something, but it's more in depth versus breadth. And I don't know, I get questions like, can you actually fix my computer? But no, not the software part of it. Can you fix the hardware part? No, really. But there's many sorts of those things. I mean, my mom just thinks that I could fix absolutely anything that she has problems with, but I guess that everyone experiences as well. Yeah. Other than that, there's a sort of biases what software engineers do. Like, it's very difficult sometimes to actually explain what you even are working on, and just people very confuse all the Google products. Like, I get the blame quite often if Google Maps is not working, if YouTube is not working, or like some other product. People really like to joke about, can you tell your team to actually fix this? Actually, it sometimes happens, but like I can do file bugs and fix things. Has happened before, quite fun. But most of the time, it's so far away removed from me that I can't actually do anything about it. Yeah.
Very interesting, but like also interesting to hear that none of the challenges you kind of like the stereotypes that you've mentioned were actually connected to being a woman in a mainly masculine field. And this is a question that Pauline has. So she asked, what was the hardest question that you had to go through in order to do what you're doing today? And how about challenges as women in a mainly masculine field? So do you experience any of those kind of challenges, or what was the biggest challenge you had to go through to kind of get to where you were?
So let me start that off. There are challenges I had before I had a permanent academic post was staying funded while keeping intellectual freedom. So I really didn't want to be employed by some other PI to do what they want to do. I wanted to do the research I wanted to do. But the hit rate on getting a fellowship application accepted or a research grant application accepted is less than 10%. And if you're lucky enough to get funding, it lasts for 3 years. So the final year, you spend searching for more funding, right? So you are on this constant treadmill where you feel like you are sprinting a marathon and standing still. It was incredibly, incredibly stressful. And I don't think being a woman or being a man makes a difference to that aspect of it. But yeah, now that I'm a permanent academic post, of course, that challenge in a way has gone away. I still have to raise funds, but my job doesn't depend on it like it used to. My salary doesn't depend on it like it used to. The challenges are actually more gender-based. Putting yourself forward it's like, you know, you have to lean in a little bit. In an academic environment. Academics are weird. A lot of the men that I work with pride themselves on being feminists and all the rest, but they're really not. They think they are gender neutral, but they are not. It is, and I'm sure the other women on this panel experience this. You might be in a committee, you contribute some idea, no one pays any attention, and then about 5 minutes later, a man repeats it, and everyone's on it like a fly on shit. You know, oh yes, that's great, and you just sit there and go like this, right? That happens a lot, and so in order to get promoted, you have to kind of push yourself forward for it in a way that I think women tend to find a bit unnatural, but men have no problem with. So you kind of have to learn to do that. Yeah.
Is that a similar kind of pressure or challenge that you experienced working as a consultant or in a bank, Lucy?
Yeah, I think both places have been dominated by men, or at least the teams I was a part of dominated by men. Definitely my consulting firm was mostly men. And that actually, when I was thinking about going back to do a master's, I'd applied to the University of Edinburgh and then kind of delayed my application. So it had been on the back of my mind when I started consulting. But I sort of got to a point where I didn't really like the person I was becoming and the person I felt like I needed to be in order to advance at the company I was at. And I think that is variable depending on kind of the teams that you're put into or the office that you're in, kind of who you're, instead of a manager, because we had different project managers, it would be your career advisor that you were set up with. But to me, I felt that the company really encouraged people to be advocates for themselves, but I found that as a woman, that was a really fine line about, you know, when you were being too vocal versus when you were being sort of appropriately vocal about the career direction that you wanted to have and balancing that with what the company needed. And so I think a lot of that frustration kind of contributed to me realizing that if this is what the work environment is going to be like, I need to like my job more. And I think in the end, I realized I wanted to be able to do more kind of design and data focused work. And that just wasn't the kind of work that that firm was doing. And so trying to deal with the, kind of being the minority as a woman and the challenges that that presented just didn't really end up being worth it to me. So it's actually, it's been a huge influence, I think, in both jobs. Although I left for different reasons, I could see those challenges arising within the short time I was at RBS as well. And it's just the reality of the work, I think, at least as far as I've experienced it.
So in both your teams, there were way less women than men in your team. This is also a question that Chris has asked here. How many women you're actually working with, and whether it kind of changes team dynamics, whether you've worked in like a team with with more like an equal balancing, or whether it was kind of like skewed to one side as well. So Sneha, imagine that being security analyst is kind of, I know that there are not many women in security in general. How is it for you?
So back when I was trying to make my switch from software development to security, I was doing a lot of research to see if this was, a viable opportunity for me. And at that time, when I was reading up, there were only 11% of women in this field, which is extremely low. And in my team, the team that I've joined, there are 2 women and there are 6 men. But I honestly, personally, have not faced any bias because I'm a woman. I think I've been very, very lucky that way. But I do know of people, I know of my friends who have, not been taken seriously enough, or who have just found it more difficult to come up or to be heard because they are women. But personally, I haven't. I've also been very, very lucky. My mentor in my current job is a very big advocate for women in tech in general and in cybersecurity. So he keeps telling me that I need to be, like a flag bearer for women in cybersecurity because I'm here and I can, try to lead the change. So I haven't faced challenges, and I've actually been pretty lucky. Like a lot of men I've worked with, a lot of them are very, very supportive of women in tech. So that's, I think, a very good thing for me.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Um, yes, I see you're now typing in the chat
I just
as well.
actually I wanted to say something here that occurred to me that I think it's quite important to say, which is that at least for academia, it's actually really difficult to raise a family when your career is in infancy and you're trying to make your way. And so I think that's part of the reason why, when you look at an academic career, you've got quite a lot of PhD students who are women. And as you go up the level of seniority through postdoc RA, lecturer, reader, professor, it's an exponential decay in the proportion of women. And I think it's no accident that I had my first kid when I was 40. I mean, really quite old. It would have been impossible, really, to balance a small family and get my career off the ground. And I think that's a really sad thing and a really bad thing that needs to be fixed. I don't know about the other careers, but that kind of work-family balance is completely out of kilter in academia. And the men in academia have women who keep the home.
And I could second some of the things that Alex just mentioned. Yeah, so like definitely, so it doesn't happen that much in direct teams. Like I'm lucky to choose at least good managers and like good supportive people to work with, and they really I have no problem having my voice heard and so on and so forth. But like the moment you step out of this circle where people know you and you'll have, I mean, it doesn't even need to be within the company, like even outside. Switzerland is a bit more conservative country, and here it happens quite often. Like just guys specifically are surprised that I could be a software engineer. Even after explaining to them that I work at Google and I'm a software engineer, they still question my credibility. Am I actually not the student? Am I not the QA or something like that? And I have to just keep repeating that I'm a software engineer until they sort of get that. But yeah, here it's a bit more problematic, especially with the maternity leave. I think it's more country specific. So I'll probably not go into details that much because it's not so UK related. But definitely one of the challenges is at some point you realize that if you want to feel comfortable in 5, 10, 15 years, you have to do something about like diversity now. So like to organize, like I was actually part of Helpers during university, and I am sort of joining similar initiatives at work as well. Just enjoy volunteering. But the problem is that when you go to volunteering initiatives, you sort of see the same set of people over and over again, just helping out. And like men are really supportive. They're there. They encourage you. They're like, they think that what you do is great. they never actually chime in and help out. So it's kind of uneven distribution. Like I'm sort of looking at this as I want 10 years from now for this to feel like my environment to feel great, but men are not doing that. They're like sort of, yeah, you go, like go do whatever you keep doing. It's great, but they don't actually actively participate, and I think that's a big minus because I mean it takes a lot of your time as well, and it takes none from theirs. That's the big difference, I think.
I completely agree with that. Yeah.
That seems quite daunting if you want to go into like self-engineering or academia or anywhere basically. Aditi, do you experience a similar thing of being an experienced designer? Because I know there are quite more female designers than there are software engineers.
Yeah, I think that probably does help. And somehow I think I built up I go through these phases of, I have a bunch of confidence, but then I don't, but then I do. So it goes up and down. Um, I'm at a, and I think it correlates to sort of what is the output I'm producing in some ways. Um, like when I finished my master's and I kind of, I was searching for a job that was kind of low confidence. When I got a job, I was like high confidence, because, oh, like, got this, did it, that kind of thing. So I think it goes up and down for me, but uh, it has helped that there's so many designers in the field who are women. I want to talk about maybe a slightly different perspective here, which is how some challenges that I face, which are not necessarily in the job itself, but it's the some of the things around it. And so I'll focus in on some of my university experience, let's say. And this is with the when I was at the National Institute of Technology, which were co-hosting the event and stuff like that. And I think I think at that point it wasn't part of the career yet, because I was studying and I wasn't working yet. Um, but there were a lot of experiences which I think affected me and happened to me because I was a woman, and it happens more to women than men. Specifically, and I'm going to give a sort of trigger warning here, because it's sort of distressing, or it can be. Um, I faced a pretty terrible relationship, in terms of there were a lot of power dynamics. It was an abusive relationship. Um, when I went to do my master's, I faced sexual assault. And so while these were not directly, part of the job, there's still things that women face at higher rates, than men do, especially in like early adulthood. And I think what that means is that if you face something like that, you're going to spend a bunch of time in your day, like number one, experiencing that, and number two, dealing with the fallouts of it and trying to recover from it. And this is time in your day which if someone hasn't faced that, they will be able to spend it on just being happier, and maybe like applying for jobs, looking up internships, looking up other opportunities, innovations in the field. So I think, like I've come out of it. It's not that I hold things against that. I mean, of course, I wish it didn't happen. Uh, but and I think I've still managed to do a whole lot. I've still managed to stay very positive. Um, but I do want to acknowledge, that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of us as women who go through these kind of experiences more than men. And it might not be part of the job, it might not happen on the job, but you don't, like it's very hard to separate the personal and professional, because it's happening to you as a person, and you are the same person whether you're in the job or out of the job. So I think that's been a big one for me.
I'm really sorry you had to experience something like that. Actually, following up, and also interested to hear from other employers. Before we continue with the questions, in the chat. Do you think your job or employer kind of gives you support to deal with such things? I mean, we heard that there are kind of like gender-based challenges as well, but also does your employer or give you the feeling that they kind of try to support women in other ways, or is there anything to kind of make this a better environment for you? Also, if they're even if they fail at some points, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think they definitely do have a lot of support in that sense. And so I work at Walmart. I work at sort of a startup which is completely owned by Walmart. But it is a part of Walmart. And when I started out, they had kind of some of these trainings which were pretty extensive, and um, I did follow up on some of that in terms of, okay, this is what you told me in the training. Really, can I call the number if I want to? And I haven't tried it because I haven't needed to, which is great. But the way they presented some of that material gave me a lot of confidence that they would be supportive. There have also been these interesting times when like some like a colleague of mine um, made a comment about um, I think the comment was around like, hey, did you know that deeper voices tend to be more pleasant, and so maybe you could think about kind of modulating your voice. And yeah, I can see the way all of you are reacting. The thing is, and very honestly, very truly, okay, so hear me out through the whole thing. I'm not making an excuse for this guy. I do think that he wasn't very aware of what he was saying. And so that was my first question to him, like, hey, do you know what you just brought up? And then we kind of chatted about it a little bit, and I said, so it actually, this is part of a bit of a gender dynamic. And I kind of explained where I was coming from on that. And he got it, and he apologized, and he said, oh, I see, I didn't realize that. And so I think from the official methods that my company has, which I can use to kind of address issues, I've also tried talking to people, and I think Walmart has set it up that we have a culture of respect for the individual, regardless of gender and race, and class. And so I think Walmart has built that culture, which made it easier for me to have that conversation with that colleague. So yeah, I think the place where I work has done a lot, and I feel quite supported.
So, Aditi, first of all, thank you for your frankness and honesty. And also, I'm in awe of the fact that you hold him up, because very often when women are subjected to these sort of little incidents, they kind of just let it go and,
Yeah,
ignore it. So well done, you. I want to talk about my experience. As deputy director, so before I was director of this research institute, my managerial role was deputy director of the informatics graduate school. And as part of that, I was basically responsible for 540 PhD students. We got masses of PhD students in my department. And I was getting a lot of complaints on a regular basis about behavior and interaction. A lot of it from women, not just women, I have to say. Some of it sexual, some of it not, but all of it involving some kind of power play. And so often involving women, not always with their supervisor either. And every one of them, whether they were a woman or a man, had come to me with an incident that I personally found completely unacceptable and outrageous, but they didn't want it to be taken any further. They wanted to resolve it themselves, and they were coming for advice on how to resolve it themselves. And frankly, for some of them, what I was observing was repeated bad behavior to several people by one guy. And I couldn't act on it, and it was really annoying. So as a department, top down, it tries to instill this structure of inclusivity and welcoming diversity of race, sexuality, and gender. But a lot of the top-down stuff is box ticking. It kind of has to be. There are online courses on unconscious bias, and we have a few forums for doing this and that. But at the end of the day, it's what matters is what happens at the grassroots. That kind of interaction that Aditi just talked about there, with that guy going, "Oh, I find lower voices more pleasant," or he said it was research actually found lower voices more pleasant. Haul them up, at the time. It's a really hard thing to do, and especially for women, because they don't want to come across as aggressive and touchy, and fussy and thin-skinned and all these things that they tend to get accused of if they haul up every single minor incident that occurs to them. But without it, we can't educate in a timely way. And I found it very frustrating that they were coming and saying, "Don't tell anyone else, but this, and this happened." And I'm like, I want to act on this, this is a disciplinary matter.
Yeah, I think there's, the patterns of behavior and the kind of the institutional way of dealing with it. I think we have one layer, which is probably the layer of a lot of institutes are putting in what I call now is becoming basic. The basic level of we have a training for this, we have a policy on it, we tell everyone about the policy, we tell you how to get help. Which I think is, everyone should have this, yes. But I think getting everyone to have that level of policy has been the work of, people for decades previously. And I think we're all benefiting from it now. And I think we can also now start to ask for a little more, right? So I'm very interested to see how it goes, and all of these. I think something that's become more and more evident to me is all of these systems are just systems which were built by some person. Some person thought of what the sexual harassment policy is. Some person thought of what the process for a complaint is and established that procedure. But it's very malleable. If we think of a better one, we should suggest it. It's not set in stone. And maybe that will be the work to come.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I was unfortunately just thrown out by Blackboard, so I think I missed a couple minutes. And I cannot see any of the chat messages again. So if you have an urgent question that you want asked, please do post it again so I can ask it.
There's some interesting ones. I can see some of them. I think
I was just kicked out of Blackboard, and I had to join the session again.
Aparna had asked a great one at one point as well about to Lucy, do you think people in tech entering jobs in banks have a learning curve with respect to financial concepts and terms, or is it something that isn't relevant to their job?
Yeah, so we're kind of curve back to the job part, away from the gender-based challenges that we experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, Lucy, if you feel free to answer that question.
Yeah, so I think it's something you definitely want to take the time to do. It would be silly not to, but I definitely wasn't alone in coming in with a background in something that was more technical or design oriented and not sort of focused on like banking or finance as an industry. I think I also, having worked in consulting and bouncing from industry to industry, I was pretty used to sort of going into a new client and just having to learn all the jargon, or like almost like just, I don't know, kind of the business specific language, then the industry specific language, all from scratch. So I think with a lot of jobs, that's something that there are industry specific sort of terms and processes and practices, but there are also a lot of those that are specific to the individual company you're at. So it's just part of kind of learning on the job, and it's not something that I think would ever put you at a disadvantage. If you're going into a bank and you happen to have financial experience, then obviously that can be something great to talk about. But you definitely wouldn't be alone going into an industry like that and not having experience in it as a tech person.
How is it in other
And I
jobs
think
with oh, sorry.
I'd love to add to that from maybe a retail side of things, because I'm a designer working at a retailer, and so maybe there's something similar which sort of applies, like how much do people need to have retail knowledge? And I agree with Lucy about it. It won't stop you. It definitely won't stop you from starting your job and getting in and getting employed. Um, I think once you're there, it has helped me to understand the retail world, and that's more evident now because I have to design stuff for the actual store, and so that's really front and center in the retail experience. But even if you're designing for something that a store associate uses, I think it's always helpful to know more about the industry you're in, because it just gives you a lot of context. It makes you better at your job. So yeah, I totally agree with Lucy about it doesn't stop you, and so you shouldn't take it as discouragement from any job that you want to apply to. It usually doesn't stop you.
That question also ties in very well with a question from Chris before, how difficult it is to get into cybersecurity position if you don't have any prior experience. But I think that does apply to other jobs as well. Like, how hard is it to kind of get into the job that you are doing without having much prior experience?
I think I answered Chris's question there, but I think it's a very relevant question. Since cybersecurity is relatively a more niche field than in technology right now, it is difficult in general to get a job in the field, but it's definitely not impossible. I think one thing that most recruiters look for is your interest in the field and how much work you're willing to put in to join. So, from my experience, yeah, definitely prior experience would help, but I don't think it's as much of a deciding factor as if you have the interest to work in it and really put in the effort to show them that you're willing to do what it takes to get the job done. I think that's more important.
Cool. And I actually have a question here to Elitsa. Do you sometimes feel like working in a big company like Google can be very alienating, like joining a big university opposed to working for a smaller firm with more interpersonal communication?
I guess there's two perspectives on there. Like Google is a big company, but Europe is quite, like the software engineering world in Europe is quite small. Like I started 2 years ago, and there's still people from my year that graduated 2 years ago. They're joining like during those 2 years here. It's a small community, I think. Like compared to the US, yes. Like in Silicon Valley, that could feel pretty much like that. But in Europe, even across different companies, I feel like from uni and from like high school and other communities events, I know so many people. And also what is common at Google, transfers between teams are very easy. They would rather have us transfer to a completely different team than put the company, because there's quite a steep curve to learn all the tools and like be productive at Google. It's true. But once you have this like sort of basic knowledge, even if you start at a completely different team, sort of knowing tools and how to work like with the Google setup, it's invaluable in comparison to the other, to like new people. So they definitely don't want to lose those people, and transfers are very frequent. People transfer every 2 years. So it depend, sometimes even less, but in general, you tend across your career you tend to meet the people again and again and again. I've been at 4 teams now, even all the internships, and from 2 of those internships, quite a few of the people have been transferred different positions. So like they were not an engineer, they were a different kind of engineer, but they're now working with in my bigger team. So definitely doesn't feel like a a big company. In the Europe offices, it definitely feels like a smaller community.
And what kind of advantage do you think you have in your job? Is it like an advantage that you are in a smaller team, but you're in a big company? Or yeah, I'd be interested to hear about the advantages that you think your jobs have.
Yes, I could start. Definitely, that is a big plus, because I mean, job transfer is very easy, right? It's super easy to just, if you get tired from the project you're currently working on and you want to start on a completely different thing, there's possibility to start things like actually security, to try out security temporarily, to try out different site reliability engineer, for example. That's a bit more. It's a different pattern as well. We have like those short-term opportunities that you could switch to, and yeah, like it's definitely a big plus because you don't need to change absolutely everything in your setup. You don't need to change a country or like the company, the people you sort of work with, but you could really easily change the whole skill set you have. And it's kind of, I think, the job of the software engineer. You never are a master of what you learn. You always have to learn something new, and then in a year or two it gets deprecated, and then there's something new, and you always learn. And that's a nice thing about it. But also some people might see it as a bad thing because you're never really comfortable with whatever you're using.
That sounds pretty cool. Like keep being in a constant challenge as well and continuing to learn. So I think Sneha, you mentioned that as well, right? That you kind of have to keep on top of all the new things to develop in the cyber world. Is that like, do you see that as an advantage, or what kind of other advantages do you feel like you have in your job?
That's definitely an advantage because it increases your opportunity to learn. I mean, you have a huge opportunity because you, I mean, I think sometimes when you have the opportunity to learn, not everyone may take it. But here, in order to be successful at your job, you have to keep upskilling yourself. Otherwise, no one's going to hire you and you're not going to be good at what you do. Coming to other advantages, I think my particular role gives me a lot of flexibility to explore, things in cybersecurity, but which is of more interest to me. So my team has 8 people, and each of us are skilled at something very different. So there's this person in my team who's a genius at like coding, and he automates everything that we do. And there are a couple of us who are more into malware analysis because we find that more interesting, and we're trying to get better at that. So see, after I spend a year doing malware analysis, I can very easily start looking at some other skill to specialize in. So that's a huge advantage I think I have in my role here. Yeah.
Cool. How about Alex? What do you think is a big advantage for you? Oh, we can start with Aditi as well first. So what do you think is an advantage of your job? Like, what is it that you really, really enjoy compared to other jobs you had?
I think I enjoy the mix of business, engineering, and design, and I really enjoy the fact that it's a very innovation focused job. So my team, we get to we get to explore, and as I said, almost like play around with all these new technologies, and then build a bunch of proofs of concept almost. And we have to prove out a lot of different things, like does it work as a business plan, do people really want it, is it possible for engineering. So I enjoy that we're always working on something new, and I enjoy the combination of business and engineering and design.
All right, and yeah. So Alex, do you want to say what you think is an advantage of your job? I mean, we already talked about what the things are that you love most about your job. So
Yeah.
what do you think is
So
actually
the advantage is actually also the biggest burden. the advantage of being an academic is it's complete flexi time. No one cares whether I'm in the office or not. No one cares if I take the day off, you know, which is really useful if you have a young sick kid. You know, you never have to worry about childcare and stuff like that. So back to that work-life balance in that respect, the full flexi time and the freedom that I have to do what I have to do is great. But it's also the weakness, because instead of having a time-based job, it's a task-based job. And so I'm handed many, many more tasks than hours in the day to do properly. So I live constantly with overwork, unpaid overtime, and guilt, because I never do anything as well as it could be done because there's too much on my plate. So it is both the biggest advantage and the biggest disadvantage is this task-based thing. They just give me a pile of stuff to do and they go do. We don't care when you do it, just get it done. And it's just too big a pile.
That sounds very much like the academia I know. It's quite interesting, Lucy, that you joined as a PhD student now. I feel like probably you don't feel the same pressure as Alex, but if you compare it to like working in a bank or as a consultant, like if you compare the advantages, like what would you say?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's parts of what Alex you were just talking about that totally resonate and that I think happen when you're a consultant as well, as the idea of sort of overwork and never being able to do something as well as you'd like. And I think I definitely had in my undergrad sort of perfectionist tendencies, and so that was a hard adjustment. But I think for me, kind of going through that experience of having a hard deadline where I had to finish something and then I would switch over to a completely new project and a completely different client, and it made me a bit more comfortable with that, and it made me a bit more picky about what I want to really like kill myself to do the best possible work for, and what I want to just sort of set aside a dedicated period of time and say, this is the time you have to get this done, so just do it now and then cross it off your list. And so I think in consulting it's great because that pile of work does end at some point when the project finishes, at least when you're early on. I think as you get into management, it gets a bit harder, but I think at the same time, it's always just sort of like skimming the surface. It's always good enough. And I felt like I really missed the opportunity to think really deeply instead of just thinking kind of quickly all the time. And so coming back to the PhD, I think that's what's been really nice is I can choose. I have a little bit more freedom to choose what I really want to dive into really closely versus things that I want to just kind of get done because it's good enough and there are other priorities that I want to kind of dedicate more of my time to. Yeah, I think kind of the difference in my position and Alex's too is that I'm sort of the lowest on the totem pole in academia, so I don't have the responsibility of managing other people, which I think would start to make the experience very different in academia later on.
Yeah, that's pretty good insight into like kind of the different ones. I would like to finish the round because it's almost 5 o'clock with a question from Chika. I'm so sorry, I'm mutilating your name. About work-life balance combined with the question they've just asked here about job satisfaction. So do you feel like it doesn't have to be actually work-life balance just with like kids and everything, but do you feel like you actually have a little bit of free time as well that you can you know, where you can have hobbies and things like that? Or is it as Alex said, like 70 hours of work and you have to make sure you don't burn out? So and how do you balance that, balance work and life at the same time, and how happy are you with how you are succeeding with that?
Well, I have to say I used to succeed much more than I do now. So when I was a PhD student and as an RA, I think I had a much better work-life balance than I have now. Life was a bit simpler. It's a bit like Lucy was saying, there's less there's less juggling going on. You know, you got to finish your thesis. That's the thing. As an RA, you got to get those publications out. Just get the research done. That's the thing, right? But now I juggle 50 balls, and so my life becomes very saturated. So yeah, when I was more junior, I played in a jazz band. I was in a choir. I was part of a theatre group. I was a ballroom and Latin dancer. Actually, while I was in Stanford, I became a North Californian Latin dance champion. You know, I had a lot going on. And sewing, big sewer. Sewed my wedding dress in the end. But yeah, sewing is the thing that really, you know, it's therapeutic. And all of that, you know, post having my daughter, went by the wayside. And now I just feel guilty about everything, including raising her. You know, I just not enough time for anything. Yes, I haven't really quite got over the trauma of coming back from maternity leave, to be honest. And that was 16 years ago. At which point, you know, the juggling got crazy. And you know, I juggle. I keep the balls largely up in the air, but it is actually quite a big personal cost. Yeah.
How was it for you, Sneha? Your work-life balance, and are you happy with how you're succeeding at the moment?
So Cisco actually has an amazing work-life balance, and they really pamper their employees. And you know, I think most people in Cisco wouldn't leave unless they absolutely have to, because they make the office atmosphere so nice, and it's so much fun to, you know, just go to work. And our whole office, at least in India, in our Bangalore campus, we have like multiple game rooms. We have nap rooms and massage lounges and things like that. So, and they really stress on the fact that life shouldn't be just about work. And they encourage us to take off some time even during our day to say, go to the gym or go to the in-house theater and just book it and watch a movie with your friends. So they're very, very nice that way. And but ever since lockdown, since March, I don't think it's just a Cisco thing. I think everybody's work-life balance has just gone for a toss. And it's not really, I saw this post on Instagram where they said it's not really work from home anymore, it's living at work. And that's, I think, very, very true. So I'm hoping it goes back to before soon. And yeah.
That sounds very accurate. Living at work. Sadly. Yeah, so you say like it kind of has a lot to do with work culture as well, in that sense. Yeah. I saw there
Yeah.
was like a side conversation going on as well. So Lucy, you said you were quite surprised that people actually take lunch breaks in the UK as well. Do you feel like here in working in the UK actually made it easier for you to like have a life with your job?
Yeah, I think consulting is known to be definitely like one of those jobs that will have longer hours, but not the only job in the US. And I think I was also coming from New York City, so you get a lot of very sort of like, I don't know, people that are super passionate and like their job is their life, and they are just, I don't know. I think the city is like always awake, so you always feel like you could just keep working. And I think it took me a bit of time to realize I need to just start doing more than just work with my life, and transitioning from undergrad to working life for the first time. I think that was kind of the biggest thing that I learned after kind of burning myself out. But yeah, I think here honestly, I couldn't believe that every day people took a lunch break and didn't work during lunch, and then like my whole team, and it was very rare that people would join for lunch, and sometimes they even went for a walk after lunch, and I think it's really healthy. And so yeah, I think although I appreciate that kind of like passion for work, I do think that I wasn't alone in feeling burnt out in the kind of consulting world I was in, and I think it can go a little bit too far sometimes. So it's about finding the right balance. I think there's, you know, it's okay to have those really intense weeks for a short period of time, just not constantly.
Yeah, I think that's also normal where you kind of have like a bit of a rush for a bit, and then afterward it should settle again, so you can get on with your life. Elitsa, do you experience anything similar? I know you mentioned something about work culture as well.
Yeah, so work culture could be very different across very different teams. You could have a team where everyone is just like working like crazy all the time, and then you should check with the manager and the team before joining the team if you really are okay with the setup. And there's people that they're teams that are very social. Like across the 4 teams I've joined, like I had teams that will go for lunch every day, always be the team, and to the point I'll feel guilty if I go with someone else. Then there's teams that like I managed to go with the team maybe every 2 weeks, and that was okay. Everyone preferred to eat on their own. Yeah, so it's varies pretty much across teams and also across different product areas. It's very, very different and diverse. But yeah, also on the work-life balance with COVID, it's definitely tricky because before I could do things at work, like I have something scheduled and then I have to leave and I know I have to leave. But now it's so much easier to just, even if you do have something planned, like your whole setup is at home and it's really easy to start working late and just switch back on and off. And I thought that I had gained it at some point, but I keep getting back into this loop of like not functioning and then functioning. So I don't know. It's something to work on constantly.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for joining the panel. So we are now at 5:05, running over a little bit, but we also started 5 minutes later. So I want to thank all of you for taking time to join the panel, discuss your work, and answering all the questions from the audience and from me. I'm sure it wasn't easy. And yes, I'm very glad that the Blackboard also worked well enough, except for kicking me out once. But I'm very happy, and I'm very honored to welcome you all. And it was amazing to kind of just hear about what you do, and also give everyone the opportunity to kind of learn a bit more about your jobs and what kind of opportunities there are also next to it. So yes, you're very welcome. Happy to organize. I want at this point, I want to actually thank the team. Most of them are actually not in the call because they had to run off. But I want to thank the team for helping me run this. Run the two big days for At a Loveless Day, and this is also actually the last event I'm going to organize for Hoppers. Because I'm leaving and then I'm going into maternity leave, so this will be great. Yes. Before we finish off, we have like a really cool, a cool one from the couple of votes that we have, that I want to just share the link to, and you can take a look at it in your own time. And thank you so much for the congratulations. I have spent a lot of years in Hoppers by now, so it's time to hand over to people who have a bit more time now, and will probably do a really good job. And the last video, Moshe from Marcus, has won. So yes, congratulations at this point. Right, but do take a look at the other videos as well. They're very cute. There's not many of them, but yeah. I can also see, yes, Elitsa and Aditi as well, who had to unfortunately leave a bit early. They both said it's fine for them to be contacted. We also linked to the LinkedIn pages from our website. If you click on the speaker picture, then you can actually either get to their personal website or the LinkedIn. Right, thank you so much for joining. It was lovely, and I'm actually going to turn off the recording now.